Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplanty Goodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me and in front of me today, and obviously this is the plant I'm going to be talking about today. So, continuing on from the review series that I'm doing here on YouTube, I thought I'd go for the quintessential wish list plants for a lot of people over the last few years. By the way, this is the Monstera borsigiana albo variegata, but essentially it is the small leaf white variegated Monstera. So the aurea is the yellow variegated Monstera, this is the albo, and that means white variegation or cream variegation. Generally speaking, I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this. Aurea for most variegation types would mean yellow, albo would mean the white variegation. But anyway, back to this plant. As I was saying, this is one that a lot of people might have wanted in their collection for a while. I know it's become a bit more readily available in different places. It doesn't carry as much of a price tag as it used to, and we'll dive into that as well. But just some ground rules essentially for what the review is. The reviews, all the reviews that I do are massively biased towards my situation because I can only talk about what my experience has been with this plant, and it's also based on my environment. So for instance, I'm based in the UK, in Europe. It generally means it can be quite cold and quite wet in the winter time. The summers don't get blisteringly hot. We do, however, have radiators in the house. They're not fan radiators, so the humidity doesn't drop quite as drastically as some places. I think the US have got kind of heating systems that are similar to aircon, so they blow hot air, and I know that can really dry out the environment. Here we've got radiators. It still dries out the environment, but not to the same extent. And I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, with all of these reviews, because this is completely based on my experiences, and I can tell you about that, if you've got your own experiences that you would like to share, and I'm hoping there's probably a few people out there that have already got this plant, and you want to share your experiences with this plant, do drop it in the comments down below. But yeah, generally within these reviews, I will look to cover things like the background that I've had with this plant, also ease of propagation, speed of growth, availability at the time when I got this. And again, I will always say the same caveat. If you're watching this video and you're just going, these numbers don't make any sense, or this availability or this price range doesn't make any sense, check the date because things change a lot in the plant world. So this is how it stands currently. It will likely change in the next few months, years, so on and so forth. So yeah, I was going to say we cover background, ease of propagation, speed of growth, pests, and is that it? And then some final thoughts where generally I will give a score between 0 and 10, 10 being the highest, obviously. But yeah, without further ado, let's dive into the background. Now, the background of this plant, and there is a second plant that I'll lift up in just a moment to show you. And as always with all of these sections, when I'm talking about background, I will see if I can get an image from my plant care app. And as I keep saying, they're not Instagram worthy. They are literally just pictures that I took to put on an app to remind me when I need to care for the plant, water the plant, all these things. So they're a bit rough and ready. And I'll see actually, because I've got two of these plants, I'll see if I've got two different versions of those kind of earlier images that I can put up, and then you can kind of see basically. But there is a story, and actually what I might do is I'll pick up the other plant first, because the other plant is the one that I got first. And welcome my first ever Albo Monstera. And I'll use Albo Monstera just because it will make things a bit easier rather than me having to say Albo, borsigiana, Monstera, and all these things. So let me shift it around so you can see some of the variegation, and you might be able to see why with this plant I then ended up going for a second plant as well. And I don't know whether or not I might be able to still have some of the original leaves. So these were some of the earlier leaves that I've got on there. But interestingly enough, and I'm trying to not cut off the top bit, this was one of the original leaves and it was fully green. But let me put this down because it is very heavy. And I don't know, in a good way that you might be able to see some of these plants whilst I talk. Well, that's probably good enough. But yeah, this was the first plant that I got of the two, and this was, I need to double check this, and I'll put it up there. It says I've either had this for 3 years or I've had this for 4 years. That tells you something. So when I first got this, it really was very difficult to get a hold of even a cutting of a Monstera alba. And I found a lovely person that I follow on Instagram, and she was kind of moving plants around. She was taking cuttings of her mother plant, and some of her mother plants were some of the most beautiful albos ever. And it was a silent auction on her Instagram stories. And I put a bid down for something that didn't have an awful lot of variegation. I was starting to more heavily go into plants at that point, but I still didn't know everything that I know now about variegation. So I was still hopeful that I might get more variegation than what was on the leaf. Obviously now a lot of people know it's to do with the genetics of the plant. So if there's not an awful lot of variegation in the stem, you probably won't ever get huge levels of variegations in the leaves. But I was kind of okay with that because I know with Alba Monsteras, the more white, and especially with some of these people that want a half moon, which is that half white, half green leaf, there is a very high chance that it will get even more white, and it starts getting into territory where there's not enough green on the plant to help it photosynthesize, and you can run into troubles. So I didn't mind having a bit less variegation. Granted, I would have liked a bit more than just some speckling that you get on some of these older leaves. Interestingly enough, the newer leaves have got a bit more variegation on this plant, so you might be able to see there and there. I'm sorry that it's getting a bit blown out, but I've got the sun rising first thing in the morning directly in front of me, so yeah. But yeah, so this was the first one I was trying to root out. It came over, I'm trying to think now if it had roots or not. It might have had a few roots, but I still needed to root it out before I put it into soil. And I will say this is in a terracotta pot, very tall plant, and a ceiling fan is always fun. So terracotta pot and my usual aroid soil mix. There is also, for the eagle-eyed amongst yourselves, a very rare spotting in my collection of a moss pole rather than just support sticks. And that is, if you've got a Monstera, you know why. There's only so much that a poor janky support stick will do in terms of the sheer weight of most Monsteras. Moss pole is not so much needed for the moss, it's more needed for the sturdiness, essentially. But that was the first plant that I got, and it was growing quite nicely. Let me bring up the second plant that I got, and I'll talk a bit more about that, and also what I did when I first got the plants. Okay, so back to the original plant that we were looking at earlier on. You can see that this one does definitely have a lot more variegation. You can see also some of the earliest leaves. When I first got it, this was one of the first leaves on the plant. And I think this is probably about 3 years old, this plant. It does also have secondary fenestration. I was hoping to be able to keep them or bring them back. It's not happened yet, but I'm okay with that. Just to clarify as well, both of these plants have been propagated. So they were even taller a few months ago, basically. So I took quite a few cuttings off the top of them. So, and you might be able to see as well some of the crisping there. Let me see if it won't get blown out too much. But you might be able to see some of the browning that is happening there. Another thing as well is that I don't know whether or not people have noticed this, and somebody was asking me about this the other day. How about a bag of aerial roots? Yeah? So I know you can cut off aerial roots and it doesn't cause the plant too much harm. I know you can shove them back into soil, which I usually have done sometimes with these plants. And some people suggest to put them in water and then it will help the plant grow. I don't know if that's true or not. So it's one of those internet hacks, and I'm always a bit dubious about anything that's called a hack from people that don't deal with plants a lot. But yeah, I got this from a local seller, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Sarah at Eastern Tropicals here in the UK. She's also local, as in I could actually drive and go and pick up the plant from her. And it was interesting as well to hear the story of how she started a store. I think, if I'm not mistaken, she started it with albo cuttings because she got a few people who were starting to be aware of them and be a bit more interested. And that's what kickstarted her business as well. I don't think it was massively expensive when I first got it, but I'll talk about availability and price in a bit. But yeah, I mean, I got this mainly because I wanted a plant that didn't have huge levels of white variegation, but that had a decent level of white variegation, a bit more than what you saw from the original plant. But yeah, I mean, this one was the plant that I learnt the most on because I think this was unrooted, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe it just had a smallest bit of root and just needed to beef up that root system. I don't think Sarah back then was selling unrooted cuttings. I don't even know if she's selling unrooted cuttings now. But there was only one long kind of root on it and it didn't have any secondary roots. So I wanted to kind of give it the best chance. I was also going on holiday, which stressed me the hell out with this plant. I didn't plan it well, but I was just like, well, I need to go and get it. And I think this was my first quote-unquote rare plant. So this was a big deal. And I think I thought I was spending a lot of money getting this back then. Past me, little did you know. But, but with this plant, yeah, I kind of rooted it out in water in an opaque pot with tinfoil on the top, so not letting any light get into the roots. And I was literally changing the water daily. Luckily, by the time I went on holiday, I could just leave it in the water. I think that was probably, it wasn't a preference that I wanted to definitely start it in water. I think because I knew that I was going to go on holiday and that watering might not be that frequent, or I was a bit worried that the person that was going to be watering might not know what to do necessarily. So I thought water is the safest bet. At least it might be in the same water for a couple of weeks whilst I'm away on holiday, but I can instantly change it when it's back. And as long as I'm keeping the water fresh daily, which I was dumping out the water and using new water daily, then it was fine. But yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to say on background. Let's move on to the next topic. Okay, next topic is speed of growth. So this is an interesting one with this one, and I'm pretty sure some people might disagree with me in the comments, but again, as I said, I can only talk about my experience with this plant. And my experience with this plant is that it was relatively slow to root out. I didn't have the conservatory at that point, it was just regular household environment. So it took a while, and maybe it was just the water propagation method that took a while to root out, to get it to a point where it was doing secondary roots and ready to go into soil. That did take about 2 or 3 months. It was quite a slow plant. Granted, this one, because it had much more white, was slower than the green one. And there's no better comparison as to when you get highly variegated plants that they can take a longer time to grow and propagate when you see the same plant, the variegated version or the less variegated version or the non-variegated version against each other, and you can really see the difference in speed, basically. Because obviously it makes sense, the less amount of green there is on the plant, the less adept it is to be able to grow, sustain itself, all these things, so it will take longer. But speed of growth after both of these were put into soil, and they're both in terracotta and they're both in an aroid mix, eventually it kind of balanced out. At this stage, like a good few years later with both of them, when they're a substantial size and they're established within their pots, and this might be the year that both of these plants get a repot. We're going to go on to the horrendously huge terracotta pots. That's always fun. But they're kind of on par now a bit on their growth speed. Granted, the one that's a bit more variegated, I have got closer to a light source, and you might see some bleaching on the leaves. Interestingly enough, the crisping that we saw a moment ago only happened I was able to keep all the white parts of this plant pristine. Granted, I'm in a conservatory, the humidity level is high, the levels of light are good, the watering is on a good rotation for what these plants need. It's the moment that I took a cutting, I started getting crisping. Before I took a cutting, no crisping whatsoever. Interestingly, with the one that's got more green, that's not a problem. And if anything, the new leaf on the one that's green, since I've taken cuttings, has actually got more white. But again, remember what we were saying, it's less to do about the light or anything else, it's more to do about the genetics. Obviously, where I cut the stem for that one, there was probably a bit more DNA going through for the variegated parts, so that's why it's presenting itself more in those leaves. But speed of growth for this one, as I said, slow to get going. Like if you're getting a single leaf or a double leaf cutting that's rooted and all these things, to get it to a stage like this, I mean, this will tell you an idea. I mean, this is the size of this plant. Granted, it's a single stem. It's not got, yeah, it is a single stem. It doesn't look like it because it seems like there's a second one in there, but it's a leaf that's coming out from the outside. Not the fastest of plants. It probably grows a tiny bit slower than my Monstera. Interestingly enough, my Monstera deliciosa doesn't grow particularly fast for me, but But yeah, this is a plant that does take its time. The more white it's got, the slower it will be. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about speed of growth. Let's move on to the next topic. Ease of propagation. And I do actually have some propagates of this that I can bring up. Let me do that now and we can kind of talk through it with the propagates being in front of me. So yeah, looking at propagation with these plants, and I'll show you some of our propagates and we can talk a bit more about them as well. So for instance, this first one that I'm going to show you came from the second Monstera that I've got, which had the higher levels of white, but you can see there's obviously a lot of crisping on the white. There's only that bit of green. I am rooting them in pond within a water reservoir, and you can see, you hopefully might be able to tell if it's not getting blown out drastically. Maybe I'll see if I can add some pictures in this. It is rooting out. I've not had a growth point come up just yet, but also this was a mid-rip cutting rather than a top cutting, so that gives you an idea. But I just wanted to test and see because obviously this has got very little green. Interestingly, on the stem, on the petiole itself, there's a lot more green than the leaf is exhibiting, so it should still be okay. The genetics within the plant should be fine. The second one, again, is from the same plant because you can see the higher levels of white. And this one did quite well. There was the closest thing I've ever got to a half moon, and I was getting secondary fenestrations. Actually, I forgot about that at that stage. This was one of the original leaves, and this was the new leaf, and it looks tiny, but it's got the full fenestrations and everything. This one was a top cutting, so I would expect it to kind of keep maturing quite nicely. It's rooted out beautifully, and it's doing quite well. And let me show you the last one, which is from the first Monstera deliciosa, the one that's got more green in it. And this one, I hadn't realized because it was right at the back that it grew as well as it did. I think, oh, there might be two cuttings in here. That's why I was getting a bit excited. I'm like, this went crazy. So you can see the greener leaves here. This one did have a decent chunky variegation. I'm trying to see. So from this leaf, I got this new leaf. So it's got a decent level of green, but there's no fenestrations. But that was a mid-rib cutting. This one was a top cutting, and there is a new lovely leaf that's come through with some good, okay levels of variegation, secondary fenestrations, and yeah, it's growing in quite nicely. There's a tiny bit of crisping that's happening at the bottom, but I think it's because these are quite close to a radiator at the moment. But ease of propagation with these. So it's an interesting one because both of the plants that I originally got, some people might call them propagations because there wasn't that much of a root system on them, so I had to further propagate them before I put them into soil. But these are some of the first ones that I've taken cuttings purely from the plant and put it in. I propagated, obviously, as you can see, in pond with a self-watering reservoir at the bottom, which I've had good success with. And these are just under a very weak grow light. And I would say from the moment of cutting to the moment that they are now, so they've got the first leaf and they've got a decently developed root system, I would say a couple of months in this environment. And again, to give an indication, because I know people want me to benchmark, with a standard kind of golden pothos in here, to root out from a cutting, it might be 2 or 3 weeks. So it gives you an indication of kind of where I am. And yeah, I mean, relatively easy to propagate. And this is bringing me back to the point I wanted to make earlier on, where you're seeing potentially a few more of these coming, is because they're relatively easy to propagate. I will say that with the Alba Monstera, the more white that it's got, and there's a reason why I've got it in aroid soil mix in terracotta. I think if I'm going to up pot them, I might actually not go for a terracotta pot. I might go for a net pot to just let even more air out. Pretty much with all my Monsteras, that are in soil, I will let them go fully dry, fully dry before I water them. And I find that does best, especially with the albos. There is a higher chance of root rot, I found. And that's actually from talking to a lot of different people, not just from my experience. So, and I think actually on the first one, I did, first one or second one? First one, which ironically enough had less white, I got some root rot at some point. And that was the first time I was dealing with root rot, which back then was for one of my rarest plants and my most expensive plants. Cue the meltdown. But it's fine. I learn, and everybody will learn. It sounds horrible, but I actually do encourage you, if you're worried about getting your first expensive plant, do it. And it might sound horrible, but even if it fails slightly, the things that you will learn from that process and the things that you can kind of fix there, yes, there's going to be some stressful moments. That's worth the money that you've paid for the plant. That kind of level of fast learning that you're going to have to do if the plant starts struggling, especially if it's your first expensive plant. I wouldn't suggest you do that. You go out of your way to do this, but if it does happen, it can be a good thing. Look at the silver lining if you can. And I'm laughing because I remember myself back then, essentially. But yeah, so there's a higher level, the higher chance of potentially some root rot. So that is something to bear in mind. But yeah, let's move on to the next topic. So availability. Availability is an interesting one. When I was first getting this, as I said earlier on, there wasn't as many of them around. People were becoming a bit more aware of it, so there was a lot of people searching for them, but there wasn't enough supply. So the demand was high, but there wasn't enough supply. But I did, as I said, I managed to track it down from a personal collection of one person and from Eastern Tropicals for the whiter one. And I don't think an awful lot has changed. There's been some fluctuation in the last few years. Actually, let me touch on price really quickly. So when I was getting mine, and it was based on the cutting, it was based on the level of variegation in terms of pricing that you could see online. So a decent level of white variegation with a sizable leaf rather than a juvenile leaf to start off from something like that, at least here in the UK, and I would assume Europe was the same, was very high double digits. I think it was probably very low double digits at that point. It hadn't even dropped down to the double digits back then. So remember, we're talking about 3 or 4 years ago now. So I know things have changed already since then, and it wasn't as available. The situation currently, as it stands, I think you can get cuttings, even rooted cuttings from this plant that are high to mid double digits. And the reason for that was, at least in Europe, there was not huge, but there was influxes of very mature, full-grown plants, much bigger than any of mine, actually, of Monstera albo that came out from some of the nurseries in the Netherlands, and those got picked up really quickly. And obviously people propagated them, as there's probably a lot of people that bought them just to cut them up and propagate them and sell them because they were selling for an affordable price. I think the prices that I was seeing when they first came out were between, say, £200 to £500 or £600, depending on the sheer size of the plant. And even that's come down now on occasion when there's more of these that come out. So still not the easiest thing to find, at least here, but prices have gone down because there were so many cuttings that got rooted and got sent out to people. This is probably high to mid double digits now. I'm even seeing this in some garden centers now. The prices are still that kind of mid to high triple digit from those kind of growers. But yeah, it's an interesting one. It doesn't seem to be going down too quickly currently, but I think that might change because, as I said, a lot of people did buy it. A lot of people specifically bought them to cut them and propagate them and sell them. So, which does break my heart ever so slightly. There are certain plants like this. I still think it's a beautiful plant, and I do hope that there's more people out there that want this plant to enjoy this plant rather than want this plant to make a quick buck off this plant. But that's my 2 cents. But yeah, that's kind of what the availability was then and now. pests for this one. I'm trying to think now if I've had pretty much every type of pest. No, I've not had mealybugs, touch wood, on this. Even in here, actually, which if you've been around for a while, you know that in the conservatory I've been struggling with mealybugs for a while now. Thrips. And people who've got some elbows, I think, will probably agree with me at some point. If you've got thrips, or if you did get thrips at some point, your monsteras and your elbows definitely got attacked. I think for most people that I've talked to, obviously, if you've got different experiences, let us know down below. But yeah, thrips on this one. Nothing will make you stress out like thrips on an elbow, especially in the early days. I don't think I've ever had spider mites on this. I very rarely ever talk about fungus gnats with most of my plants, and there's a good reason for that. I don't generally get fungus gnats, even with the level of watering that I do. But I'll do another video about how I deal with fungus gnats, essentially. But yeah, I think thrips were the big one. I've never had any scale, touch wood. Maybe a touch of spider mites at some point, and I've got some spider mite satchels on here, which would kind of indicate that maybe there was some spider mites at some point in the summer. But thrips were the big thing with this one. But yeah, I think that's it for pests on this. But just keep an eye on your monstera for thrips, maybe a touch of spider mites as well. Going into final thoughts, and this, I'm looking at the timer on my camera at the moment. This has become a lot longer of a video than I thought it was going to be. Apologies. But review and kind of the overarching kind of thoughts for this one. I'll start the same way that I do with most of these. If I didn't have these plants and I knew what I knew now, would I still buy them? 100%. 100%. That's not even under debate, essentially. I do still very much love my Albo Monsteras. Both of them, even the slightly less white one, essentially. But the thing with the Albo Monsteras that I was saying is, and again, for the people around, I've got very little patience. I'm one that kind of likes things happening quickly. This, and I think this might have been the first plant that taught me patience, which is not a bad thing. I do thank it for teaching me patience when it comes to growing plants. And if you really want something that's spectacular and it takes a bit longer, sometimes it's worth the wait, basically. There's other times when it isn't, but sometimes it is worth the wait. So bear that in mind. It's not the fastest growing plant, I found at least. Yes, there are a lot of people who have got this that might struggle with this. It's interesting because I think from what I'm hearing online, there's a lot of people that get it and struggle with it, but there's also a lot of people that get this as their first rare plant. Same with mine. I would almost say this might need to be your second or third rare plant or hard to find plant, just so you can kind of fine tune. It will save you some stress further down the line, because if you can fine tune your kind of process with some other difficult to find plants first and then go on to this one, you'll be a bit better prepared. But it's still going to be okay as a first plant. I think that's probably why you see quite so many videos on the Albo Monstera, because a lot of them are for people that are learning because it's their first plant, which is fine. In terms of the scores, from 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, I would give this a strong 8 or a 9, actually. I'm a still fan of my Albo Monsteras, and generally Monsteras, I've done other videos about this, are most of the time ironclad. They just keep on keeping on. And based on the fact that this is kind of closely related to the Deliciosa, it's got almost the same level of tenacity. As I said, it's a bit weaker when it comes to root rot sometimes because of the white, and you'll get the crisping on the leaves and all of these things when it comes to humidity. So, and again, I will say this before somebody makes a comment down below. I've moved the plants 3 times in the last 3 years, all of my plants. This is the first time they've had a conservatory with constantly high levels of humidity. Both of these plants were at household humidity, and I wasn't getting crisping on the leaves. The way that I was doing that is decent light levels and being spot on the watering, basically. So bear that in mind. It's not always about humidity. At least it hasn't been in my experience with this plant. And yeah, so a decent score. I would buy it again. Yeah, I think that's it, basically. As always, if you've got your own comments, review even, hopefully some of you have probably got this plant and you can leave some of your own comments for people looking to get this. Please do drop them down below. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.